The TNFD had made it very, very clear that you support an integrated approach to reporting on climate and on nature. Why is this so important, and how do existing reporting standards come into play, if at all?
Well, I think as we just heard from Sue Lloyd at the ISSB, while as humans we like to break complicated issues down into parts, into components, nature doesn't do that, of course. Nature is one integrated system. So really the challenge for all of us in business and finance, policymakers, regulators, etc., is to take an integrated approach to an integrated challenge. And so at TNFD, we explicitly built on top of the work of the TCFD in relation to climate disclosures. And I think a lot of market participants who are already looking at the work of the TNFD recognize the familiarity of the structure, the language, and the approach. And that, of course, was by design. And of course, we hope that this then flows into the global reporting baseline by the ISSB as well.
You just said nature doesn't do that, and we heard that many organizations have spoken about the challenges they faced in getting the data they need for robust disclosure, particularly around nature. We often hear it's more challenging to quantify than emissions are to quantify. How does the TNFD framework help companies to overcome these challenges?
Well, one of the first things we did when we got started in late 2021 is we did a gap analysis on the nature data landscape. And what we found actually is there's a huge amount of nature-related data out there. I think the challenge for many market participants is that because this is a new topic, a new area, there's not a lot of familiarity with where to find that data. But there is, in fact, terabytes of nature data out there. And so really the challenge is to make that data more comparable, to make it more accessible. And of course, CDP itself, as we just heard from Sherry, has a huge amount of data on water and forests and other issues. So I think the TNFD is really focused on identifying the gaps. Of course, there are some gaps. There are consistency issues. There are quality assurance issues as we think about the assurability of nature-related data going forward. So we're working on those issues with a range of partners, including CDP. We've also announced plans to explore the idea of a global nature data facility, a bit like the NZDPU on the climate side, so that we can try and make nature data easier to access, better quality and more comparable, because of course that's what investors are ultimately looking for, comparable data to inform their decisions. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I think we can start from the premise that there's not a lack of nature data. There's actually a huge amount of nature data out there. It's about making it more accessible, better quality and more comparable.
Great, so there's still more to come. Pietro, from CDP's perspective, how does this partnership with TNFD help companies to overcome these challenges and report on nature?
Yeah, first of all, it's a great pleasure for us to partner with the TNFD. It is particularly important to build on what the companies have already been doing for many years, disclosing on forest and water on our questionnaire. But indeed, we're looking at the partnership with TNFD to elevate that. The data that we have showcases that the nature disclosure is still a bit in its infancy. So the coming to fruition of the TNFD recommendations will indeed increase the level of disclosure on the topic of nature. On our side, as a key disclosure partner for nature of TNFD, we're already partially aligned with TNFD, and the prospects is to further this alignment in the years. With this launch of the CDP questionnaire in 2024, with the integrated questionnaire, we allow companies to look at climate and nature together, which is indeed, a very important nexus, because you cannot really tackle environmental challenges without looking holistically at climate and nature at the same time. And the option of introducing the TNFD in our disclosure indeed, caters for that need.
So yeah, as we just heard, everything is interconnected. You can't separate both fields. Tony, what does the TNFD take away from the partnership?
Well, I think we've actually had a partnership with CDP now for over 2.5 years since we got started. In fact, one of my very first conversations when I joined the TNFD on our launch was with the CDP team. I remember talking about CDP's expertise around water issues in particular. So we've had CDP as one of our 20 knowledge partners since the outset. We've had tremendous input from the CDP team in developing our recommendations. And I think now that we've published our recommendations in September last year, we're now moving into the next phase, which is really about building market capacity to act. And this is where the CDP platform, I think, will come into its own because of the sheer scale of the platform, that 23,000 companies, I think that Sherry mentioned, already using the platform. We're very excited about furthering our collaboration with CDP to fully integrate the TNFD recommendations into the questionnaire, and then to work together on addressing these market needs and capability gaps around nature-related data. So there's a lot of work to do. I think we've had a fantastic collaboration over the last 2.5 to 3 years, and we're looking forward to extending that as we go further. So that companies, now that the recommendations are out, can move to taking practical action. And that means collecting data and accessing data in a consistent way. And I think the CDP platform is uniquely equipped to play a key role in that journey going forward.
So if I understand it right, Pietro, it's just the beginning, the first step of this partnership, even though it's already 2.5 years, as we just heard. Can you tell me more on the plans to progress alignments?
Yeah, no, indeed, you know, when we started pioneering disclosure on water and forests back, you know, over 10 years ago, we started creating that norm among companies to look at nature-related disclosure. We've been expanding this with biodiversity questions and with plastic-related questions over the years. But we still notice that actually the companies responding to the nature-related questions is still, you know, quite low. Looking at our companies, just over than a third of the companies that go beyond climate disclosure, looking at the key nature data. And if you look at the financial institutions, actually 85% of the companies reported climate risk, impact and opportunities, but just 20% of those assess wider nature risks. So indeed, you know, that's the reason why we need, you know, a partner to keep pushing for nature data. If you look back when the TCFD recommendations, and Tony, indeed, you know, mentioned the fact that TNFD echoes the learnings from TCFD. When TCFD got to fruition, actually the level of disclosure on climate skyrocketed. There was, you know, a great leverage, and we at CDP introduced in 2018 the TCFD recommendation in our disclosure. Therefore, now with the adoption of the TNFD, we expect that to really norm more strongly corporate behavior, and we intend to align further and over the years to a full alignment with the TNFD. At the moment, companies disclosing with CDP already are aligned with the part of TNFD, but of course, you know, there are data gaps, and there are elements that we are not yet looking at very closely, which are actually included into the TNFD realms. I'm thinking about oceans and land, and that's something that we are really looking forward to introduce in our disclosure platform. Of course, the experience coming from the framework, from the TNFD, will help us with the right metrics, with the right elements, definitions that we can implement in our disclosure platform.
So the goal is full alignment. Tony, I saw you nodding.
Yeah, well, I think I was just going to add that we have already done a lot of work on the metrics for reporting on the nature side. And of course, we started in many cases with the CDP metrics that were already there, forestry metrics, water metrics, etc. So there is already a good level of alignment. And I think CDP reporting companies are actually incredibly well placed to start making disclosures on nature aligned to the TNFD recommendations, and very much building on the climate reporting that they've already been doing. And in many cases, they'll be able to use the data that they've already been capturing and reporting into the CDP platform, because we've used exactly the same metrics. So I think we are all pointing towards as much interoperability and alignment as we can. We've learned from the CDP metrics. Of course, there's the need for additional metrics, which we've worked on with a number of knowledge partners, and hopefully they'll make their way into the CDP platform going forward. So it is very much an iterative process, but I think things are moving very fast.
Yes,
Pietro.
actually, yeah, no, thank you. Tony, thank you for mentioning it is indeed, you know, two ways partnership. So the evidence that we collected through our disclosure has actually been informing as well the developments of the TNFD, as, you know, we do this with other standard setters. While norming corporate behavior through our questionnaire, we learn what the market uptake is and what the market is actually doing. And therefore, we can support standard setting organizations and frameworks to develop standards and frameworks that build on what is already happening in the market, and of course, you know, raise the level of ambition.
You just mentioned, both of you, interoperability, which is a very difficult word and probably also a difficult concept. And we're right now here in Brussels, in the heart of the European Union. How can TNFD help companies to comply with CSRD obligations, Tony?
Well, we've actually just been working with EFRAG in the European Union on a mapping exercise between TNFD and CSRD. And the good news is there's a very high level of alignment between TNFD and the new European Sustainability Reporting Standards. In fact, all 14 of the TNFD recommended disclosures are represented in the ESRSs. So that work is available. It's shortly going to be finalized. There is already a draft available on the European standards body website for those who are interested. But I think it just speaks to the fact that the TNFD recommendations were being developed in parallel with the European reporting standards. And so we were talking to each other throughout the last 2.5 years. And so no surprise that they're highly consistent with each other. So I think for those companies in Europe already figuring out how to report on nature-related issues to meet their CSRD requirements, TNFD is a very helpful tool to help them achieve their CSRD reporting obligations. And of course, they can leverage the CDP platform to report into the data, to gather the data, and leverage the platform to help them do that as well.
I'm pretty sure this comes as a relief for many companies watching right now. Pietro, what's your take on how businesses can use the TNFD and to prepare and also boost their competitiveness?
Yeah, I think, at the moment we experienced many investors, financial capital providers requesting this kind of information, requesting nature, biodiversity, plastic-related disclosures. So I really feel that while creating a set of recommendations that highlight which are the key realms for nature, this will create even more appetite among users of this decision, and therefore will create a competitive advantage for those organizations that start the process to align their disclosure with the TNFD. We heard from Tony. Indeed, there is a dialogue among the standard setters, which is key to the interoperability that we offer on our platform, because we have that one-stop shop where companies can come in, disclose, write once, so that it can be read for many different use cases. And that will help the companies from one side in terms of the interoperability, but the standards themselves have to create that interoperability, which is indeed happening. Therefore, our take on companies using disclosure for their competitive business case is very compelling. It is important and we heard from the presenters this morning from China, for example, how much the disclosure helps the strategy of the companies, as well as, put them to the path towards the compliance. So ahead of compliance, aligning with the TNFD through the CDP disclosure allows companies to get the competitive advantage, the early starter advantage. And that's what we feel is incredibly important for us to offer the companies disclosing through CDP.
So not only reporting because they have to, because actually it helps them.
It does help them, yeah. There are several business cases that we can bring to the table. Many companies showcase that indeed their disclosure give them access to financial capital, give them access to a competitive advantage in the market, builds, of course, the brand reputation, but establishes a dialogue, a transparent dialogue with the customers and with the stakeholders. Of course, compliance is very close to my heart. That's my bread and butter every day. But indeed, policy is one element of the use cases. I think Sherry this morning mentioned that. It's one of them. The other is access to capital. The other is the competitive advantage. And of course, the why of all this is the purpose, is why we're doing this. And it's indeed to advance our corporate performance in terms of having a better impact on the environment at large.
So we are talking about a lot of advantages here coming from disclosure, but it's more than this. I feel there's a real shift in how companies have to operate to survive, to be part of the economy of the future. And looking into the future, maybe a more visionary question coming out now. Where do you see your partnership in 5 years? What should happen in the next 5 years? If you had this talk again 5 years from now, Tony, what would look differently?
Well, I think we're going to see a real revolution in the use of nature-related data coming. I think we're seeing the early seeds of that now, and I think TNFD hopefully provides an architecture and a framework for companies to think about how to make their businesses more resilient in the face of nature loss. In fact, I was really struck by the comment from colleagues in India a few segments before, basically saying, this is important because it's about the resilience of your business. And I think that's absolutely right. On the climate side, a lot of businesses are thinking about how to adapt to a warmer climate. On the nature side, and I hate to distinguish the two because we started by saying they're incredibly interconnected, but on other aspects of nature, every business has critical dependencies on nature. And if we don't take care of the flow of benefits that nature provides into our businesses will cease to exist. So this really isn't just an exercise in compliance. This is about the long-term sustainability and survivability of businesses in a planet that's changing because of the impacts we're having on it. So I think data is going to play a fundamental role in that, both on the risk side, but also on the opportunity side. And I think what we're starting to see now is data and analytics, including things like AI and even blockchain technologies and others, now starting to be used to find new opportunities for companies to leverage nature and work with nature to create entire new business models, new products, and new scalable financial solutions. There's a lot of talk about, for example, nature-based solutions, but there's also, I think, very exciting new terrains around circular bioeconomy, for example, the use of nature to create substitute products for things like plastics and things. And all of that's going to be fueled and enabled by data and analytics going forward. And I think that's really the frontier that we can be looking forward to in the next 3 to 5 years, is how do TNFD and CDP and others help to enable that revolution in data and analytics to create those new business opportunities.
So many interesting topics you brought up here. Artificial intelligence, circular economy. Pietro, where do you see this partnership and this topic in 5 years?
Yeah, I'll start with the topic, actually. I've been working on corporate disclosure for over 15 years, and I remember the discussion back then was very different. In the past, I will say 5, 6 years, I've seen a tremendous uptake of the practice of climate disclosure. And I believe that TCFD created, that push, and CDP creating the norm among companies really facilitated this. So the challenge will be in 5 years' time to see TNFD disclosure having created that mainstream practice among companies to disclose information about nature. In terms of the partnership, I think it really depends on the evolution of the TNFD, but we are confident that if we work together, introducing and seeking full alignment with the TNFD, we will actually be able to inform the policies coming ahead, and ideally, this will increase the level of expectation on nature disclosure by companies. It's always a mix of the two elements. It's the market dimension, and which is a kind of a pull force, and the push force created by policymakers to really get the companies to disclose. I think the mix of those two. Therefore, I really look forward, Tony, to our collaboration in the next 5 years. Can be incredibly transformational, and no pressure on us, right?
Pietro, you've mentioned CDP as being an implementer of standards, so to speak. How does CDP actually do this? How have you done this in the past? How can we imagine that?
I can make, again, the reference to the TCFD recommendations. We were incredibly, involved in the shaping of those recommendations, of course. But as soon as the recommendations were adopted, we implemented those in our disclosure practice, in our disclosure platform. What happened then? The many companies disclosing through CDP, which is a market-driven tool, indeed, market-driven system, indeed, got many companies to adopt the TCFD recommendations. That has been tremendous uptake that we've been driving ahead of regulation. Then what happened? I think it was 2019 Global Climate Summit. We made an analysis coming from our data, and we realized that actually many companies disclosing through CDP were indeed TCFD compliant, almost TCFD compliant. That gave to the governments that we engage with the evidence and the confidence that they could have put in place policy and regulation requesting TCFD-aligned disclosure. And that started happening. Then, as we heard from Sue Lloyd today, from the IFRS standards were based on the TCFD recommendations, and the recommendations were translated into standards, which is now on the way to adoptions as the official standards in many different jurisdictions. That's the theory of change that we like to see, and I expect this to happen as well on the nature-related disclosures.
So from data to action.
Yes, indeed, always back to the action.
We heard a lot about the opportunities for companies in applying the TNFD to get ahead of compliance requirements. What's your take on how businesses can use it to prepare and also boost their competitiveness, Pietro?
I think it's indeed quite important to look at the appetite for this information, the request of this information. And as I mentioned a bit earlier, we've been interviewing the financial capital providers, our investors and our capital market authorities. There is a need for this information from the financial capital providers. This is a huge force to really get those companies that are disclosing nature to have a competitive nature disclosures, to have a competitive advantage vis-a-vis those that don't have it. They will have better access to capital. They will have better positioning in the market vis-a-vis other companies that fly blind, that don't manage their nature inputs, risks, opportunities because they don't monitor them, they don't report on those. And then we go back to the usual adagio that we like, you cannot really manage what you don't measure. Therefore, it's critical to do the reporting. Again, not the most exciting part, but it's the starting point. It's the bedrock of the action that we want to see among the companies.
Yeah, thank you. Tony, what's your take on that?
Well, I was just going to add to those comments that I think what we're seeing at the TNFD is a lot of engagement from investors. One of the investors that I spoke to recently said to me, we can decarbonize our portfolios, but we can't denature the portfolio because every sector that we invest in is dependent on nature. So I think investors are realizing that they have to confront this set of topics, climate and nature, head on from a risk management perspective. And that means that companies are going to get a lot more questions from investors and other capital providers, from banks, from insurers. And so I think there's a real impetus now for companies to move onto the front foot, to not see this as a compliance issue, to not try and just stay 5 minutes ahead of regulation, but actually to move onto the front foot, to embrace this issue, to start using the kind of tools and guidance that TNFD has provided to get started. In addition to our disclosure recommendations, we've actually provided an entire risk assessment process, which is called the LEAP approach. In fact, the European Union refers or recommends companies use the LEAP approach to start assessing their nature-related issues. And so I think there's a real need and a real impetus now for moving onto these other aspects of nature beyond climate change, so that companies can be thinking about the implications for their strategy and for risk management, and getting themselves better prepared to be answering those questions from capital providers, because I do agree that this is going to become a point of competitive advantage. Companies who move quicker will be seen to be on top of and managing their nature risks. Companies that are slow are going to look like they are not on top of their exposure to potential nature risk. And I think investors are educating themselves very quickly and going to be asking tougher questions sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tony Goldner, for these insights into the partnership and the integrated approach. This sounds very promising. I'm looking forward to hearing again in 5 years what has happened. Thank you so much.